I'm going to let everyone in.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this important meeting. And we have a lot to cover this morning, so I will introduce our speakers as we go through that, but I would just ask folks, especially people who are here, I see lots of people who are here for the first time, if you want to just put a little bit of your information in the chat and give everyone a chance to know who's here, and then we'll make the list of people who are here available to others, because one of our hopes is that there are some good connections that get made as a result of this conversation. You know, I want to begin by thanking really the talented members of our staff who made the task force run and put together today's meeting, really making it what it is, which is the incredibly good forum for our 54 cities and towns. In particular, I want to thank Assistant District Attorney and Director of Training and Hiring, Alia Holiday, and our Director of Racial Justice Initiatives, Antonia Thompson. They, as you all know from the emails and things that you've been getting, they put in an incredible effort bringing us together today to talk about this specific recent incident that occurred in Malden. And that incident arose when a young girl attending her first day of school at the Mystic Valley Regional Charter School was the subject of a school action for wearing a hijab, a universally recognized head covering worn by some Muslim women. Now, strikingly, the paperwork given to this young woman apparently misspelled even what the punishment or what the action was being taken for, the wearing of the hijab, as jihad. Now, I don't want to confuse any of the underlying facts, so I will leave it to some of our speakers who are much closer to the ground and to conversations about what actually happened here to provide us with the more detailed factual briefing. But as soon as I learned about this incident, I knew that our task force had to respond. All of us are really blessed to be living in an incredibly diverse county and commonwealth. You know, for generations, people literally from around the world have been drawn to Massachusetts and to Middlesex County to attend the world-class educational institutions, to work in this hub of cutting-edge industries, and to live in a place which we generally believe to be known for its high level of cultural awareness, tolerance, and opportunity. That rich diversity that's been created by the migration to Massachusetts and to Middlesex is a blessing, but it comes with great responsibility. And sadly, it's incidents like this at the charter school several weeks ago that remind us that we need to be constantly vigilant against incidents of bias, hate, and ignorance-driven conduct. It's not enough, it just is not enough for our schools and our communities to be free of intentionally biased conduct. We must work to free ourselves from those that arise from ignorance as well. And I want to put this incident in its proper perspective at a higher level as well. You know, much has been said over the past several months, and the president will be addressing the country tomorrow to talk about democratic backsliding, that idea that American democracy is under attack from various forces and that democracy is in recession around the world. And many of us watched the January 6th insurrection and the hearings that followed, seeing that attempt to overturn the results of a free and fair election, and pointed out that that was an attack on democracy. But at the same time, we don't always recognize the way that smaller scale incidents can chip away at democracy. And I'm suggesting that incidents like the one we're going to talk about today, as well as many of the incidents we've talked about here in prior meetings, are democracy eroding events. And in support of that, I'd suggest to you the conversation that's been led by two leading scholars on democratic erosion, Suzanne Mettler from Cornell and Robert Lieberman from Johns Hopkins. They have together recently released a book entitled Four Threats: The Reoccurring Crisis of American Democracy. And they argue that there are four kinds of threats to the American democracy that wax and wane throughout history. Sometimes they overlap with others. And they argue that democracy in this country is under the greatest assault when all four are present. And those four threats that they talk about are political polarization, debates over who belongs in the United States citizenry, growing economic inequality, and excessive executive power. And I want you to keep in mind as we talk about this incident today, what, if any, of those threats are implicated here? And I would submit that there are several. The school's action primarily seems to call into question who belongs. And I think one thing that we can do well in listening to our speakers today is be considering how you, in the roles that you play in government, we have members of the state legislature here, various organizations, how can you lessen the number of people in your community who ask themselves, do I belong? Because that's become a popular question to make people ask themselves in the last few years. And if we set that goal of lessening that number is our true north, I don't think we can help but make great progress. And that's why I'm so excited to have with us today the folks that are going to talk about this. It's a very distinguished panel of speakers. Each of them in their own way has been working on these issues and helping through their words and, more importantly, their actions to help people feel more included. So my hope is that obviously there are some details of the incident that we cannot discuss with respect to privacy for the young woman involved and her family, but that in talking about what happened and responses and best practices, we will leave you with lessons that you can take back to your community. So thank you again for being here. And I'm going to begin by introducing our speakers. We are fortunate, as I mentioned, to have with us Mayor Gary Christensen, who is currently serving his fourth term as the mayor of Malden. He is a triple alum of Suffolk University, receiving a bachelor's degree, a master's degree in public administration, and a law degree from Suffolk University. And Mayor Christensen, who presides over one of the most diverse cities in our county, has, during his time as mayor, really made great strides to make people feel that they belong. We talk all the time about the fact that Malden High School is one of the schools in the country, leading schools in the country in terms of the numbers of languages spoken by their students. And he has been a wonderful partner and made great efforts in making people feel included. We are also fortunate to have with us Tahira Amatul Wadood, who is the Executive Director and Chief Legal Officer of the Massachusetts chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, one of the largest civil rights organizations in the country, who has over 16 years of experience in corporate, family, and civil rights law. She is a former staff attorney with the Weston, Massachusetts Community Legal Aid before she went into private practice. She's also served as a commissioner on the Massachusetts Commission for the Status of Women and is a graduate of Weston New England Law School. And with her is Bob Dugan, who is the legal director for CARE Massachusetts. And both CARE was actually involved in this incident representing the young woman and her family. And really, I think, did a wonderful job in terms of trying to get this incident to a resolution that was best for this young woman, and also helping to deal with the public reaction. Because in all of these incidents, there's obviously what happens to an individual, and then there's the impact on the community, members of whatever group may be the subject of what happened, as well as the wider community. So we're happy to have them here with us today. Mohadnin Masalam is joining us. He serves as a special leader at the Malden Islamic Center and has been involved in a number of projects across the city in helping to increase knowledge and also inclusiveness. So we're happy to have you here as well. We are fortunate to be joined by Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller, who is the 31st mayor of the city of Newton and its first woman mayor. She was sworn in January of 18. She's a graduate of Brown University and Harvard Business School. And the mayor has over 2 decades of experience as a strategic planner for nonprofits in business. More importantly, she has also been a wonderful partner, and has pretty quickly, in terms of when she took office, had incidents like this occur in the city. She is a member of our task force. She really has been somebody who's been willing not only to listen and to learn, but to really do the work to help make changes. So I'm grateful to have her here as well. And she is joined by Mayor Paul Broder, who is the mayor of Melrose. Again, someone who's had an opportunity to really learn and struggle with some of these issues and deal with community reactions. Mayor Broder's connection to our office is long and deep. He is an alum of this office before going on to serve a number of terms as a state representative representing Melrose, and then returning to Melrose as its mayor. So thank you for being here, Mayor. We also have with us Tracy Griffin, who is a lawyer, a journalist, an academic, and an advocate. Tracy most recently served as an assistant professor in the communications department at Simmons University, and previously was chair of the media studies department at St. Michael's College in Vermont. She is a former correspondent and national editor for the Associated Press. She holds a law degree from Notre Dame, a master's degree in journalism from Florida A&M, and a bachelor in political science from DePaul. And she has just recently come to be serving as the racial justice director for the ACLU here in Massachusetts. So we're really happy to have her here. I think this is a great opportunity for you to make connections with folks. And we look forward to working with you as well. So those are our panelists with us today, and we're going to begin. And I hope I'm going to ask just a few questions to get us started, but I hope that our panelists will really take this opportunity to talk back and forth to each other and to share things that we may forget to mention. But I want to start, and this really is focused to Bob and to Hira. Could you give us an overview about what happened exactly at Mystic Valley and how you feel the school officials understood the issues with their policies, and what do you think are the next steps in terms of the school?
Well, thank you for having us. We're grateful to be a part of the convening and a part of the conversation. So much gratitude to the staff, the volunteers, and the whole community that's convened today. So, of course, as you mentioned, some of the issues that affect our young client are going to be confidential because of her age and also because of some of the nature of the legal claims that we're pursuing. But the case generated its most attention stemming from her older sister's social media post on Instagram, and then reposted by another family, wherein they tell a story about the older sister, who herself is now a college graduate, who attended the same school, Mystic Valley Regional Charter School. Even what she says in her post was 10 years ago, I was isolated, essentially punished, until I was able to prove that the wearing of hijab was a religious mandate. And essentially, I didn't like it then, and I didn't like it today when my sister came home crying, saying that this had happened to her. This was 13 days ago. The post went viral, and we were made aware of it by many people who knew that this is definitely within our wheelhouse, and that our mission, of course, is to protect the civil rights of Massachusetts Muslims. Even here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we say we have the good people, the people who know better. Well, we are employed and in a vibrant legal practice for a reason. And so this young girl was, of course, very devastated about what happened, as was her family. And one of the things that I'm forced to think about as I sat with her and her family, and Attorney Dugan and our young youth advocacy director sat with her over the past couple of weeks, is that none of this is a surprise to us. CARE Massachusetts ran a bullying report, did an exhaustive survey of the climate of Massachusetts school children. And from that, we know that 61% of Massachusetts Muslim school children have reported being bullied. 40% are aware of girls who have been physically harassed for wearing hijab. And 17% of the girls in our survey report being physically harassed or touched around their hijab. Now, you know my background. I am a statewide and former statewide commissioner on the status of women. And so what does this do for me? I instantly think this is gendered. So we have a couple of layers here as to what this child, the burden that this child has been forced to carry. We have her religious rights that have been called into question and trampled on. But we also have a gendered aspect to the Islamophobia that she's dealing with, because the wearing of hijab is uniquely a Muslim girl thing. And so when I think about who are the voices in the room and what are we focused on, I am constantly disappointed by the absence of those who are making this an issue over feminism and the rights of women and girls to not be policed because of their feminine identity. And so I will always call out the silence of our friends in that regard. I'm very happy, though, that we have people who are able to hyper focus on the religious issue here. I will also suggest that it is also could be considered in some circles racialized violence and harassment against this girl, because there are many people who identify the practice of Islam and those and Muslims as a racialized identity. So we have a trifecta here around what is happening to an 8th grader who is carrying the weight of the mistreatment of this school on her shoulders. I am an African-American Muslim as well. And so when I sit with Attorney Dugan and we look at and discuss what's happening in Malden, in the charter school, my heart breaks as the mother of Black girls that just a couple of years ago, we were here with the Cook sisters who were also violated for their identity. So what if my girls were in that school? Are we gonna have racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia? What is happening and when is it going to stop? We're disgusted, but we're very, very grateful that this student and her family reached out to us. And we're really grateful that the impetus of change is occurring.
Thank you. And I want to come back to a little bit of what you said in a few minutes about both the gender piece of this and also about the social media piece. Because one of the issues is, as we all know, you know, social media is incredibly effective. This young woman's sister took to social media, but sometimes that heat, social media is the best glare in which to try to get the issue dealt with. And I think CARE did an amazing job of doing that, of sort of quieting that in a bit to allow space for this young woman and her family to address the issue. And then obviously for us in law enforcement, there's always the worry about who's on social media and what kinds of other things can happen. So that's a problem as well. And Mayor, I want to turn to you, Mayor Christensen. And, you know, I know that you've made great strides in really concrete steps in the city to help to make people feel included, to address hate and bias in the community. And I'd ask you to tell us a little bit about that. And then also the city's response. I mean, I know we've seen a little bit in the media about the city's response to this particular incident. So if you can give us the bigger picture and then zoom in a bit on this issue.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Gary Christensen, Mayor of Malden. I just want to make one correction. The DA said I was in my 4th term. I'm in my 3rd, although it feels like my 5th, especially based on what's been happening. And I also want to say one of the things that the district attorney outlined at the outset was, in times like these, there's no better solution than having the support of everyone on this call. Tahira, Mohanad, Nicole Mossalem, and we even have some school committee members online, Keith Bernard and Sharon Rose Zyberg, I saw. And you may be asking yourself, Malden School Committee, aren't they just tasked with the Malden Public Schools? Not when it comes to civil rights. That transcends all. So when we first saw this about a week and a half ago, I immediately thought this had to be an old post. This had to be something from, you know, the last time we dealt with something similar and someone had just added a new comment. I couldn't believe when I read through that this was actually something new. So we did what we always do here, District Attorney, which was to reach out to the family and let them know that we're here and we will do everything we can to help. And so the next day we issued a statement memorializing just that and letting our community know that this is just not what we're about. I mean, we are the 5th most diverse city in the state. Malden High School is the #1 diverse high school in the Commonwealth. And for me personally, being mayor here, I've learned things that I know I otherwise never would if I wasn't here in Malden. And my family told me growing up, that is the point of all this. We sometimes tend to forget with the things about money and assets and stocks and bonds. But for me, it's about learning, sharing, and growing. So here in our city, I've learned about different religions, different cultures, different foods. And it's one of the draws for our city. It's, when I ask people why they're moving here, besides the orange line, when it's running, it's the diversity of Malden is what attracts them to our community. So in addition to meeting with the family, we also spoke with Mystic Valley just to let them know from our perspective, we felt there was a better way to go about this, which is the right to follow important traditions shouldn't need permission or the justification of the same. I think in the year 2022, especially in our city, there just shouldn't be a requirement to have to explain wearing hijab, why you're wearing hijab. Now, I understand because they are a different school system that they have their own policies and procedures, but even with that, they could retain the right to request additional information in the event the school feels a student is being less than sincere. But to just have a blanket policy that says, you first have to tell us why, we just felt that that is not what we should be doing in the year 2022. So Mohanad and Nicole and others, we held a meeting here at City Hall a week ago yesterday. They then went upstairs to see whether or not there was an opportunity to address this policy. I went to meet with Tahira and the family to again reiterate our commitment and support to them. But fortunately, as we gather here this morning, I don't know if Tahira's heard anything, but on our end, we have not heard anything as to a willingness to modify that policy. And I was hopeful, not optimistic. I was hopeful based on Nicole's involvement, along with some of the other people here, that there would be. As a matter of fact, during the meeting at City Hall a week ago, the attorney, the chairperson of the board of Mystic Valley, took his prepared statement and rolled it up and threw it. And I thought that was going to be the moment that they were going to announce that they were going to either rescind the policy immediately or at least put it in abeyance for several months so we could all work together to try to come up with something that made sense for all. But they didn't. And so, we're, kind of in a holding pattern following some of the leaders here on the call on what we can do next. I reached out to the family again this morning just to, reiterate, that we're here for them and willing to do anything we can to help.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mohanad, if you would, I think two things. One is we've talked about the impact on this young woman and her family, but I think as Tahira well points out, we're saying young woman, but we're really talking about a 13-year-old child. And we've all been 13, and we've all gone to the first day in 8th grade. And that comes with its own box of insecurities and anxieties and all of those things. So we've got a child dealing with all of that coupled with all of this. But we also have a broader community, both the Muslim community and others. And Mohanad, if you could just tell us a little bit about, first of all, what's been the impact on the broader community? And then secondly, what is it that we could be doing to help to address those issues, to help take away that feeling of wondering, do I belong?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Ryan for inviting the Islamic Center, the Malden Islamic Center, to be part of this discussion. And I wish it was that our first meeting was under better circumstances, but here we are. I think Ryan at the beginning, she said something very profound, and I think it kind of summarizes the issue that we have here. And she asked the question of, do we belong? And this is precisely the issue at hand, is that people feel that they do not belong and they are always otherized. You know, we have a policy for a specific culture and we're willing to make exceptions for you. This is how people fear that they do not belong. I personally talked to some of the parents who have children at the charter school. I also talked to a couple of alumni who graduated from the school. I also spoke with the board chairperson, George Warren, and the superintendent, Alex Dan. My wife and I and brother Abdul Wahab from the Islamic Center organized a meeting with other interfaith leaders. We had members from the Sikh community who are also affected by this policy. We had a rabbi from the Jewish community who was in the meeting, who was also affected by this policy. And we had a few leaders from different Christian churches that were in the meeting as well, with the chairperson and the superintendent from the school. My impression from the meeting is that the board and the people running the school have no understanding of any culture except their own. Well-intentioned or not, this is my impression. They do not understand why the school's policy regarding the hijab is so harmful, completely over their head. What many do not understand is the hardship and the discrimination that Muslim women face on a daily basis just for wearing the hijab. And like Tahir said, it's very specific for women. Muslim women are always the one target. I don't get targeted as much. By the time people know my name and try to use Islamophobia, it's too late, but it's my Muslim sisters who are constantly harassed. My wife got called to, be yelled at to go back home. A guy pulled over his car, yelled profanity at her, used Islamophobe with my son standing next to her. A person ran towards my wife, got inches towards, close to her face, and threatened her. These 3 incidents happened in the past 2 weeks, only 2 weeks, 3 incidents. Imagine all of my Muslim sisters go through on a daily basis. This discrimination is here and alive, even in Massachusetts, like Tahar said. Now, the issue here is, now we have a Muslim girl. It's a young girl, not just that one incident, but any Muslim girl in the school. When she makes the decision that she wants to wear the hijab, it's a huge decision for her. It's a life changer. Because one day she was this girl that was fitting in, no one was staring at her in the streets, and then all of a sudden she stands out by wearing the hijab. Suddenly she has to deal with people staring at her in the streets. All of a sudden she now has to deal with Islamophobia that she did not realize was there. People yelling at her, cursing at her, using profanity towards her in the streets out of nowhere, only because they now recognize that she's Muslim. This girl that born, raised an American, all of a sudden treated as, again, otherized. She does not belong. Go back home, go back to your country. This is the issue at hand. And my impression is that people at the school do not understand this. They do not understand that a young girl finds solace in the fact that there is always going to be a safe place for her to feel that she belongs. She doesn't have an issue. She's surrounded by people who love her. All of her friends are there. But then that same place that's supposed to be the school that she now identifies as that safe place that she feels that she belongs and loved, that same place is now singling her out, telling her you don't belong. Telling her you're in violation of the uniform. Telling her you have to fill out a compliance form so we can accept you. So I want you to understand that young girl going through all of this already and then having to go through this at the school as well. It's heartbreaking It's very hurtful. And when I tell you how the Muslim community feel, I cannot describe how hurt they are by this, simply because they know they always get discriminated against. But it's always like, well, at least most of our community, especially here in Malden, are immigrants. So they feel like maybe I'm getting discriminated against because I'm immigrant, but my kids who were born here and, you know, Muslims, they will still fit in. But when they find out even their own children are getting discriminated against, it becomes even more hurtful for them. So again, so this is the issue. This is the problem. Solution, what is the solution? I don't know what the solution is. My first reaction to this was, you know, with and we were involved 5 years ago with the Cook sisters when the issue happened as well. My first reaction was, there's no hope in the school. This school just need to shut down. That was my first reaction. But I can't say that because that would be disservice to the students that are in the school today. And me talking to the parents who have children in the school do not want the school to be closed. So I, as someone who, you know, in a way is representing them, now talking to the my Muslim community, and this is what they told me, I cannot come here and tell you it needs to be closed, but something has to be changed. The school cannot continue with these policies that they have. I understand that they have a uniform policy, but that uniform better be in a way that everyone feels that they belong, whether it's the Muslim community, the Sikh community, the Jewish community, whether people from different cultures, everyone needs to be involved. And in order for you to achieve this, whatever policy they have needs to be completely trashed. And the entire community writes the policy, not a group of people, a select group of people with whatever intention they have. Whether or not, these select group of people do not represent the community. It has to be written by people that represent the entire community of children in that school.
Thank you. Thank you. And you raised a number of issues I think we need to come back to talk a little bit. Also, just that interesting piece of how much more painful it can be for someone who themselves came to this country but feels my children will not ever suffer the kind of intolerance that they may have taken. And Mayors Fuller and Broder, if I can turn to you, and maybe Mayor Fuller begin with you. You dealt pretty early in your tenure with some incidents in the community, really targeted hate and bias type of incidents, and I think did an enormous amount of work in both thinking yourself and being reflective about how to address those, not just the issue itself, but the bigger community. One of the incidents that took place in your city involved a number of house breaks that had occurred where all of the victims were Chinese American families. And then also just, you've been a great partner in this work. So I wonder if you'd share with us kind of things that you found have been useful and kind of the reactions you've seen to the community and how you've helped to rebuild that trust in the community.
Thank you for that. And I just say it is so painful to listen to. I just think of that girl, that 8th grader and her family. Yes, unfortunately, I'd say throughout Greater Boston, throughout this country, the incidents of bias, hate, you kindly called them acts of ignorance as well, District Attorney, are so frequent and so widespread. So let me do a mini case study, a different one than the particular one that we're facing in Malden, and then a big picture, and let me be brief. Summer of 2021, within a 4-week period, we had a rash of home break-ins, all targeted to Chinese Americans here in Newton. Certainly traumatic for those particular homeowners, but it rippled very quickly to our very large Asian community and broader. It actually unsettled complete neighborhoods. And I'm so glad we've got a number of police chiefs here with us today. it was an intersection of crime and hate all mixed together. Social media played an important part in it. And I'd say some of the things that made a huge difference was certainly an excellent response by our police department, from directed patrols, real detectives who are really on it, a police chief who was in direct contact, certainly with the victims, but also walked those neighborhoods. Translation services, by the way, were very important. Keep that in mind. Another really powerful tool that we've gotten used to during the pandemic is the advantage of having Zoom available. We had, and District Attorney Ryan joined us, we had a Zoom. It went on for 4 or 5 hours. We just were going to stay until every question, anybody who wanted to say something or had a question. We had 200 plus folks on the call, and it was, you can set these up in 24 hours and you can get the word out. We also had benefited, we had close relationships and knew the leaders of the Asian community. That's not always true in every community. It was both well organized and we were well known to each other. And we even needed to bring in social workers because this was traumatic to people in this community. But I'd say big picture, that's the reaction side, and being able to react quickly, thoughtfully, compassionately matters a lot. But the question is, how do we build more inclusive communities, respectful communities? And that is really ongoing work. We're setting up lots of ways to do that, but I'd say that work, we still have a ton of work to do on that. And I'd say, by the way, clergy really matter, at least in the Newton context. Having them as close partners is really, really important. But why don't I leave it there? I know there's some other voices you want to bring in.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mayor Broder, you serve a community where, first of all, you have a number of children in your community who are going to the charter school. You also represent a city that is itself diverse and seen as a very progressive community. And yet, like Mayor Fuller and Mayor Christensen, you've dealt with some of these issues. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things that have arisen and then what you've learned and developed from that?
Sure. Again, I want to thank everyone on the call for participating. It is really an opportunity for me to learn more. I'm not good at doing more listening than talking, but I will try my best. Particular to the charter school, we are I believe the third largest sending community after Malden and Everett. And while we are less diverse, certainly than either of those communities, I, as a community leader, have a vested interest in how business is done at that school, as does everyone in Melrose. And honestly, I've been able to learn a lot from Mayor Christensen and how Malden, as an incredibly diverse community, does a terrific job bringing these issues to the table. So I'll be honest, it's a little bit trickier in Melrose because while we have some diversity, we are not nearly as diverse as some of the other communities on the call, certainly not Everett and Malden. And that presents its own unique challenges because, as our underrepresented members of the community try to navigate issues like this, they don't have as many peers or supports or organizations to lean on directly in the community that folks in other communities might have. And we're very cognizant of that and are working towards making sure that folks that are under that kind of pressure, under that kind of restriction, have an opportunity to speak up or figure out the way they can make their voices heard whenever, in very, very challenging situations. Mayor Christensen and I had an opportunity to discuss this in a different context around some of the recent incidents of white supremacist protests in the area because they were staging out of Oak Grove subway station on the Melrose Malden line. And it was a meeting led by our U.S. Attorney, Rachel Rollins, a U.S. Attorney from Massachusetts. And one of the things we all talked about was how do we engage folks that aren't comfortable really connecting with the system, that aren't comfortable maybe approaching law enforcement, approaching the FBI, that don't know where they can plug in. And it is all our jobs as community leaders to create an atmosphere where folks that are underrepresented, that aren't comfortable using their voice, can step up. Because the most remarkable thing to me about this most recent incident at the charter school is that, but for someone stepping up, the family stepping up on social media, this might have gone by the wayside. And that is the real challenge that we face. Part of it is, the charter school is more insular than traditional public schools. And we have school committee, we have elections, we have open debate where members of the public and not just members of the school community can come and give their input and voice their concerns in a public forum. That really isn't working to me in the world of Mystic Valley Charter School. What we have done as a community, recognizing some of those limits, is I reached out to my own Human Rights Commission to say, look, what do you think we should do about this? What is your sense of the proper way to respond? Because there's a lot of anger and frustration. And they were really incredibly helpful in tamping me down, I guess, a little bit in certain respects, and saying, offering the superintendent in a letter that I and the Human Rights Commission sent to the superintendent, say, look, we are very disappointed in what happened. We want to let you know we are here to help because we believe in openness and inclusivity, and our students in our community have a stake in this. So please reach out, please engage us, please engage the broader community. Regrettably, we have not heard back from them yet. Perhaps I should reach out to the chair of the board. But really, it's these connections, because we certainly don't have all the answers, but we do want to help, because ultimately, the points that I think Gary made and Mohanad also made, you shouldn't have to ask permission to be yourself, right? That is an impediment. It sends a message that you're different, and if we deem it appropriate, we will kind of let you into the club. That is not the way a public school system, or really any organization, would work, but particularly a public school system. So with that, I would looking forward to hearing from some of the folks that more directly affected and that do this work every day, can help us understand how we can help.
And I think with both mayors Fuller and Broder raised is that no one has the perfect solution to these issues. But what is helpful, and that really is the role that we hope this task force fills, it is helpful to know other people and to know them before the problem arises. So when it does, you're not looking through trying to figure out a name. You know a person, you can put a name to that face, you can reach out. And it is these kind of conversations that we hope are leading us down the path, both to greater information sharing, to knowledge, and to developing solutions. And I want to point out that, Mayor Broder mentioned the white supremacist group that was here and staged over on the Malden Melrose line. And, you know, I say all the time that we really could not do the work that we do here in Middlesex without our law enforcement partners. And you see there are a number of chiefs from diverse communities here today. Just recently, we, knowing that these threats are going to continue, did a training for our chiefs of police and their departments about intelligence gathering, how to be prepared to address these. You know, we have to be sure that when these protesters come to the community, and they're coming, we are addressing them in a way that's consistent with our values. We respect their right to free speech, but we are also being vigilant about having information that prevents a violent eruption. And we're addressing the community. Even when there is a peaceful event, it affects the community. And our police departments have been really grown in showing their willingness to learn about that, to partner with us, and to share information in the same way that we are doing today. You've also heard a little bit about a prior incident at the charter school involving the Cook sisters, and that incident, which dealt with again, the dress code and the way that two young sisters who were otherwise great students, great athletes, were wearing their hair to school, led to the recent passage. And again, this is reflective of the partnership. And I know we have with us today at least Representatives Tran and Lewis and Gabea, and perhaps other members of the legislature who took that incident and really used it as the basis for the Crown Act, which passed last year. And I'm going to ask Tracy if you can just talk a little bit about the Crown Act, because even though the Crown Act doesn't completely apply to this situation, what happened is certainly a violation of the spirit of the act, which is that people have a right to be themselves and that we shouldn't prohibit that. And that was the intent of the Crown Act. So Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you to just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to talk about these important issues. I'd first like to say that, Mr. Masalam, I hear you and feel you. These are our children. And I think that is the most important issue. These are children who are suffering because of policies that we have in place that denigrate them, that make them feel less than. And that's the real issue that we have to address here. I also like to point out that, Ms. Wadood, I think that what you talked about in terms of intersectionality is also extremely important to note. This is not just an issue of the ability to wear a hijab. It is misogyny, it is racism, it is xenophobia, all wrapped up into one. And these are the issues that we're dealing with in our communities. And so as I go through and talk a little bit about the Crown Act, you'll see the parallels. The parallels are there because at the core of each issue is the ability to be who you are, right? Uniquely who you are. And it's really particularly important that we allow our children to know that they are valued for who they are. So let's talk a little bit about the Crown Act. Now, first of all, Crown, what does it stand for, right? Create a respectful and open world for natural hair. Okay, race-based discrimination. You know, in our society, hair has been historically one of the many determining factors of a person's race and whether or not they were deemed to be second-class citizens. Right? And it remains a proxy for race in our society. Hair discrimination, targeting hairstyles associated with race, is racial discrimination. And so it's all too common, particularly for Black people, particularly women, who find themselves policed by dress codes in athletics, in workplaces, and in schools. And by passing the Crown Act, Massachusetts has basically affirmed discrimination has no place in the Commonwealth, in the professional setting, in school settings, and many states are paying attention, right? We're moving closer and closer to ensure that all Bay Staters can contribute to their communities and to their workplaces as their full selves, without shame and without discrimination, to be naturally who we are. So as it relates to this school in Malden, Maya and Deanna Cook, right? Two young students at Mystic Valley Regional Charter School. They wore their hair in braids like so many other school children do, right? And they were informed by the school administration that their hair violated the school's hair and makeup policy, and they were ordered to remove their extensions. Now, maybe this is a bit of information for folks, but the process of putting braids and extensions into your hair is not a simple process. And it is not a simple process to remove braids and extensions from your hair, right? This was a pretty major ask. In May 2017, the ACLU of Massachusetts intervened, and there was a lot of support behind it, including the Massachusetts Attorney General, right? And the school ultimately changed their discriminatory policy. And I think that's kind of what we're hoping for in this instance, right? The Crown Act is really aimed at combating hair discrimination, and it defines natural hairstyles in the statute, in the very statute, and it prohibits discrimination in the Commonwealth based on natural hairstyles in schools, in businesses, and in other public places, right? This is not just an issue in this one school, in this one community. This is a statewide issue. And we came to know about these issues, right, in this one particular school. But I guarantee you that it is happening across the state. Okay, so the Crown Act bans policies that limit or prohibit natural hairstyles in all school districts, school committees, public schools, and non-sectarian schools, and considers natural hairstyles in school anti-bullying plans, and requires that charter schools address natural hairstyles in their equal opportunity statements, right? It prohibits hair discrimination in employment, in business, in advertising, in public spaces, and it directs the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination to enforce these protections, right? Because policy without protection is really useless. And so keep in mind, Massachusetts, along with I think there are about 17 other states, in adopting this language, protects these students and these other women, but it also affects men with dreads or something like that, right? But it protects these people in ways that are absolutely necessary. And the thing about the Crown Act is that as it relates to what we're talking about today with these young Muslim students, we can often replace natural hair with the word hijab, right? And the message behind it is still the same. We have to understand, particularly as it relates to the school issue, trauma from these experiences causes these girls to miss days of school. And now we're leading into their ability for equal education. Okay, so it doesn't just stop with the ability to wear the hijab. I'll leave it there. And if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you, Jesse. And you know, one of the things I was thinking about as you spoke, and one of the things we certainly, as this task force, will be working on is, I'm not sure that there has been, as momentous as the passage of the Crown Act was, I'm not sure there's been enough public education about where this applies and what the protections are. So we have a couple of questions already that I want to put to our panelists, and then we'll open it up for people to raise their hand or continue to put questions in the chat. One of which is, and Mohanad, this is really sort of, I guess, focused at you, is to what extent do you think people who experience the painful kinds of incidents that you talked about, even with your own wife, feel that they would be heard if they came forward? You know, we offer on our website a form for reporting these kind of incidents. Obviously, you can report to the police department, any of those sort of things. Do you think there's adequate knowledge of that, that we are interested in knowing about that? And would people feel heard if they did that?
That's a good question. So two things to that question. One, do people know? Yeah, most of them do know that they can reach out and who to reach out. I mean, for example, my wife would know more than anyone else who to reach out to. But the fact that when something like this happens way too often, it becomes a nuisance, right? Like how many times am I going to call the police every day? I mean, like 3 incidents in the last 2 weeks. Like this is, it's insane. So it becomes like they just shrug it off and just go move on with their lives. That's number one. Number two, and this is more specific to this particular school, and I would speak to some of the parents, they're afraid of retaliation from the school. This school, and I've talked to some parents who told me, if they just email the school saying something, you know, bringing something to their attention, a couple of days later, their child comes with a violation of some sort. There's some kind of retaliation that the school uses, and they know that they have a waiting list. So they're proud that all of these kids want to join. So you're basically irreplaceable. If you don't like it, we will kick you out. Then there's another kid come in. This is their attitude. Their entire, like, just talking to them, I get this feeling that, you know, why do we need to change anything? If you don't like it, just go somewhere else. This is the attitude that I'm getting from that school, you know, and I don't like that. So one, you know, the first one is it's nuisance to keep on complaining. And the second one, there are some who are afraid of retaliation. And there has been a sense of the parents feeling that they retaliate against. And I'm saying that even I talked to one of the alumni, and it was very upsetting talking to that particular alumni. She's not Muslim, she doesn't wear the hijab, but she was very triggered by this event because she relived all of the abuse that she felt while she was at the school. And what she told me is that she was afraid, again, she's a graduate, she's not in the school anymore. She's afraid to speak out because she's afraid of retaliation, despite the fact she's no longer at the school. This is a very dangerous culture to have in the school.
Thank you. What about, and this is really a community question, what are the things that people can be doing to minimize this othering? You know, particularly in the schools. Is it how we recognize holidays, time off on schedules? Is it how we maybe celebrate a holiday in a public display? What are the things that communities can very intentionally be doing to minimize the othering and obviously to maximize the feeling included?
May I contribute to that thought? One of the programs that we have at CARE Massachusetts, which I am starting to realize is extremely significant, is we have a youth advocacy component to our work. We have our legal work, and then we have our youth-driven work, and we have a full-time employee dedicated to that. And part of what Fatuma does with the statewide convening of young people is that she's helping to change a bit of a culture that we have, in that maybe you just be quiet, put your nose to the grindstone, do what's asked, and people will leave you alone or people will like you. There's a bit of that culture. And so what she's doing by educating these children is teaching them that they have an American obligation to push for justice and to push this country to its ideals. And we have a religious and prophetic obligation as Muslims to always seek justice. And so what we're trying to do is at the root start to shift the culture change to let our young people know that they are welcomed, that they have rights, that their rights will be upheld, and that they should speak out. Because what we saw in the letter from our young client's sister is that they had endured this for 10 years in this family alone. And then what we've seen subsequent to the coming out of this information is you sort of have an epidemic in this particular school and then in surrounding towns of racism that has been normalized, and that an entire community has put its nose to the grindstone and just did what was asked of it. But this was the breaking point. So I think it's very, very important that we don't start here, but we start at the root and continue to nurture our children to push for better, to break generational curses of we're going along to get along.
That's true. Thank you. Thank you. I want to open it up to our audience for comments, questions. You can either use the raise your hand function or put questions in the chat. And Antonia, can you moderate for us?
I think Mayor Christensen wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's important to be doing this work year round, not just during a time of crisis. So for the mayors on the call, we are always involved with our local mosque here. They have a direct line to City Hall and vice versa. We go to the different celebrations. We just did Eid Mubarak. Let me see if I still have it. Assalamu alaikum, Eid Mubarak Saeed wa kullu am wa antum bakaya. So it's important to really truly go beyond just being in forums like this to doing the work as much as possible to try to get to where we all want to go to. So, and I can tell you, those times that you're going to events that, you know, they may not be a holiday or a major celebration, you're cultivating relationships that will benefit the city going forward. For example, with the Mystic Valley Regional Charter School, it was a parent of a student that didn't attend the school that was involved with us and being able to talk to the family. So if that relationship wasn't developed several years ago, we might not have had that contact that we otherwise did with this matter.
Charu, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you so much, DA Ryan. My name's Charu Verma. You pronounce it cha-cha-cha with a ru, and I use she, her pronouns. I actually work in Malden. My office is located in Malden, so I have special ties to that community. I've been there for about 10 years. The question that I had, and I don't really know who it's directed towards, I think it's for everyone involved. And I apologize, I joined late, so maybe this was addressed earlier. And I'm trying to think of conversations that can be had. I'm very troubled to hear that the charter schools administration is basically closed to, or that there's a sort of hostile, is that the right word? Maybe a lack of conversation or a hostility that exists there. Would this be a space where restorative justice type of conversations or considering the ripples of harm involving the whole community? I do know that DA Ryan's office does have some experience with RJ circles. Would that be a step that might, and I know the parties might not want to do this, right? It requires buy-in from everyone, but sometimes those can be the hard work and the difficult conversations that can help us take a baby step forward in some way. I apologize for the new age term, but a healing circle of some sort. But those kinds with real facilitation and mediation and parties representing everyone, would that be useful at all to consider in this situation? And thank you for taking my question.
Mayor, can I take a stab at that?
Sure, of course.
Sure. I also want to focus on something that Tahira said, and that is about amplifying student voice. What we are ultimately talking about here is the students in the school, and there's a lot of governance. There's a lot of, grown-ups kind of mucking it up bluntly. We have had very good success here in terms of a totally different and not a serious scenario, but in terms of the Melrose Public Schools dress code and how to modify it, make it a little bit fairer and more enlightened, was really a student-led piece. It was a student-led operation. They brought ideas to the school committee. They engaged with their peers from across, as at the middle school and at the high school level, and came out with a terrific product that they owned. And to the extent that we are interested, and it's a great idea to build structures around restorative justice, I really do think it has to be centered on student voice. I know it can be very challenging because it has to be a safe space where kids feel like they aren't going to, be ostracized or feel retribution for stepping up. But it's really important to make sure that we provide students with the opportunity to lead on things like this or support their efforts.
I would say no. I think it's going to require legislative or judicial action. As Mohanad and Tahira said, there's just so much history here that it's gone beyond what would be your suggestion. I've been mayor now 10 years, and it's going to take something beyond restorative justice to get to where we want to go to, I think.
Mohanad, did you have your hand raised as well?
If I may add, I agree with Mayor Christensen. I mean, we've worked together on a lot of things, and I definitely agree with what he just said. And we did offer it, by the way, when we met with them, like as a gesture, like, look, draft a new policy. We even told them you're more than welcome to even come to the mosque, meet with the Muslim community, present, the draft for them and get feedback from them. But my feeling was they just, nodded and moved on. They weren't even excited about the offer. And I thought, I'm sorry, you're the one who's in hot water right now. I'm just throwing you a helpline here, and you should be grateful, but they were just like, yeah, whatever. So I don't think, and I agree with Mayor Christensen, I think this is something has to come from above, from the DA's office, from the legislature. Something has to be done so that does not happen again.
And I know we have some of our legislators here. I don't know if anybody wants to respond or has questions about that, or other questions that people have.
John Patrick Lewis has his hand up.
Oh, great. Representative Lewis.
Thank you so much. And I just want to echo what everyone has said. So grateful for RDA convening this conversation and for this wonderful panel and for taking the time to answer questions. I've been reflecting a little because when this news broke, I mostly read Facebook feeds of people who politically typically agree with me on 99.9% of things. People who go out of their way to praise their own work in anti-racism and anti-xenophobia and immigrant rights in particular. But it wasn't lost on me the number of people within progressive circles, and this shouldn't have been a surprise to me or anyone, but the number of people in progressive circles that actually were defending the action of the charter school officials. And I know we talked a little bit in the beginning about hate coming to our communities, hate already being within our communities. I think it's just also important that those of us who walk in progressive political circles know that this hate, our own friend groups, our own parties aren't immune to this, as much as we sometimes think that patting ourselves on the back make us all immune to this. But this tension between, I think, secularism and pluralism that's playing out in our society that has meant that the victims of these discussions, this young girl in particular, but as we've learned today and are always reminded, they're a victim of this each and every day in our schools. And I think those of us in elected office who walk in more progressive circles, I think we all need to do a better job of policing our own communities and our own people as it relates to some of the nastiest things I've read online. And I think, last comment, last point on this, I promise. We had taken our family abroad to France last August. And it was a beautiful vacation. And both of my young kids left France thinking that it was this ideal utopian society. And if only we could replicate everything they had done in France, their world would be a better place. They came back more politically driven than ever before. And then we started reminding them of policies that France had put into place. The burkini ban, for example, ban on religious insignia in schools, and helping them to remember that even great societies that have done wonderful things politically on some issues continue to harm individuals, especially people with religious backgrounds, on a very regular basis. And it was eye-opening for them, it was eye-opening for us. And I apologize, this isn't a question, but just a call to myself to do a better job as it relates to combating Islamophobia and xenophobia within progressive circles as well.
And that's an important reminder, Representative. Thank you. Alia, did you have a question?
Sure. So more of a reaction than a question, but you know, when I think about this issue, I think about all the different circumstances in which someone would likely be othered, and having been a Muslim kid in a public school, thankfully having none of these experiences, but you know, some of the things that, you know, a kid might struggle with, and things that I, you know, frankly might struggle with in adulthood as well. It's not just a dress code and being able to conform to whatever the school requires, but, you know, when I think about holidays, so for example, you know, the Muslim holidays are on a lunar calendar. Sometimes you can't be as straightforward with a supervisor or even a teacher to say, you know, this Muslim holiday might fall on Monday or Tuesday. You know, I'm sorry, I just don't know which day I'm going to come in yet. You know, we've sort of very little lead time on that. You know, not all, you know, I'm thankful to work in a workplace that allows me that flexibility, but not everywhere does that. So when we think about inclusion, we need to think about things like that as well. Thinking about things like Ramadan and fasting. And, you know, whether, you know, someone might have the energy to keep up with certain activities during that holy period. That is also a way in which people are othered, and especially kids. So now, you know, Ramadan being on the lunar calendar is going to be toward the tail end of the school year now. And you're going to have kids who are not necessarily eating lunch with everybody else. And so, you know, thinking about things like that, I think are ways that schools in our communities can be far more inclusive about their approach to things. So I just wanted to add that, as well as we think about, you know, intent, and this is not just for the Muslim community, it's the community I know best, so I'm highlighting that, but there are other communities who have similar struggles. And I think it's important, as we think about being intentional about being inclusive, that we think about, you know, even those little things that can impact how people relate to each other in these spaces, that we think forward, that we're more forward thinking when we approach those scenarios.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Turn back to our panelists. Any last comments or thoughts to share?
I can go ahead and start if that's okay. I think to some of the points raised, for example, you know, about what do we do to have the kids feel like they're not otherized in the school? And I know, like, a lot of the workplaces now have, you know, usually a task force within each organization, the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, where they have a whole team thinking about these things. And it's sometimes it's as small of a gesture as, you know, when it's a holiday, and the school sends out a message saying Eid Mubarak, for example. It doesn't, I mean, I think it becomes more complicated to ask for these days to be off, because, you know, if you ask for the Muslim holiday to be off, the Jewish holiday to be off, the Christian holiday to be off, and each one, you're gonna miss a lot of days. So I think that'll be too much of an ask. But I think just a gesture, you know, that we see you, we know that you're celebrating. And I think Mayor Christensen discussed this point, because, you know, when he comes to our events, for example, when he comes to our Eid prayer, when he comes to our Muslim events, you know, the Muslim community feels like, oh, you know, he's acknowledging us here, you know, even though, you know, hopefully it doesn't take too much time of, you know, too much of his time. It's just, you know, 10, 15 minutes, half an hour. But that small gesture is just, it feels great on the receiving end. And if the schools start doing this, and then the other kids see it, you know, they start, not just the Muslim holidays, but the Sikh holidays and the Jewish holidays, they start realizing that, you know, they're diverse, and the school is celebrating all of them. This is, I think that will make all of them feel home.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I see in the chat is a note that from Lisa that Medford schools have updated their calendar, adding in other dates as well as religion holidays celebrated by Christians. And also including that those should be days, to Alia's point, where maybe tests should not be given, or kids may be fasting, that kind of thing, to be mindful of that in making their lesson plans. I want to thank our panelists. I think that you've all given us a great perspective on some of these issues, some great suggestions. I want to thank everyone for being here. And, you know, we really want this task force to do a number of things. Number one, to help us collect information about things that are happening, to help make the connections, and to help give us a space where we can all very intentionally learn together and how better to address this. And I just ask you, as we bring this session to a close, to keep in mind what I mentioned at the beginning. I think that question of what can I do every day to decrease the number of people who are wondering, do I belong in this community? If you keep that in mind, I think that really points the way towards the actions we should be taking. And that is our goal in this community and obviously in this Commonwealth. So thank you all. Be safe. Enjoy the holiday weekend. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.